881-3811.
Victor Davis Hanson, welcome to the program. I wanted to ask you a few questions so the audience can also hear your response. We have a man in the White House who stood up to the most grotesque form of tyranny during his 4 years there, including actually when he decided to run for office. Virtually every instrumentality of the federal government and the establishment sought to prevent him from being president, and then sought to remove him, and then sought to destroy him, actually imprison him. The media, academia, major corporations, his opposition party, his own party undermining him. Have you ever seen anything like this?
No. And I don't even hesitate on that. We've never seen a president. I guess Andrew Johnson had some flimsy charges of impeachment, but nothing flimsier than what we've seen with the whole whistleblower Ukrainian hoax. And the Robert Mueller was 22 months. It was a complete bust. They tried everything, Mark. It was the emoluments clause. It was the 25th Amendment. It was the voting machines. It was the first articles of impeachment. I think 11 days after he entered office, Rosa Brooks was writing in Foreign Policy that we should consider a military coup. Never seen anything like it. I don't think anybody has. Nothing like it. And this scandal, I think, about the voting is the most egregious of all of them.
And let's talk about this. This is absolute anarchy. Obviously, every state has the right to set its own procedures, but the Democrat Party went into every state, particularly the key states. They litigated. They brought over 200 lawsuits. They tried to change the rules. They went form shopping, including the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the boards of elections, secretaries of state. They definitely changed in some of these states, but especially Pennsylvania, but also in Georgia and Michigan. The manner in which people vote, when they vote, how they vote, what conditions these boards will consider when counting the votes and not counting the votes, all intended to help Biden and the Democrats. Do you know of any changes in any state that were intended to help the president and the Republicans?
No, and not all of the changes you list were done by majority votes of the legislatures as the Constitution specifies. It's the legislatures, not these administrative boards that are supposed to be responsible for setting voting laws. But it was even worse than that. I mean, the left talks about voter suppression, but if you were a resident of a voter in Wisconsin, and 4 days before the election, you were told by ABC and Washington Post that Donald Trump was behind by 17 points, you might not want to give him money. You might not want to knock on doors. You might not want to vote. You said, what's the point? Or if you're on election night and Mr. Mishkin at Fox News calls Arizona, and here I am in California, why would I want to go out and vote for David Valdeo? I think the whole world is crumbling because his solid rock Barry Goldwater state has just disappeared. And then I look at the board, and there is Florida and Texas, and my eyes tell me that Trump is one big, but I think it can't be, or they'd call him. So this is just temporary. And so they built this narrative from the very beginning that Donald Trump was facing a landslide, and it really weakened any argument that you had to watch Michigan or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, because in his own backyard he'd already lost. First thing that happened, he lost Arizona. And then when you think of these pollsters colluding with the media, you couldn't talk about Hunter Biden at all. It was just taboo. It was off limits. But you could talk about what? Donald Trump removed some post office boxes, a complete fantasy, or another smear that he libeled the war dead. So this trifecta of the media and the pollsters and these state boards have really robbed us of the fundamental aspect of citizenship, the sacred vote of the American citizen. It doesn't exist. I think millions of people feel that they have been disenfranchised. The idea that Donald Trump, with these massive rallies and this surge, and then you see this pathetic Joe Biden sort of like a drive-in movie honking horns, and you're told that this is a very dynamic campaign. It just doesn't, it's shocking is what I'm searching for.
And let me ask you this. Victor, I also look at this. We actually won seats in the House. We didn't lose a single Republican incumbent. We've held the Senate. We flipped 2 legislatures to Republican. We were supposed to lose them. So Donald Trump is this juggernaut that brings all these victories behind him, and yet he loses? Does that make sense to you?
No, it makes no sense at all. I think even the Washington Post said today that he wasn't an anchor. He was a boy that kept all of the down ballot candidates viable. It doesn't make any sense to me is what's so hard to figure out in Iowa and what's so hard to figure out in Indiana and Ohio, but right across the borders you can't figure it out in Michigan or Wisconsin. Makes no sense. And what Utah can do it, why can't Nevada do it? And the answer is that anywhere there was a perceived swing state and there was a Democratic board or a Democratic influence, there were these hiatuses that just popped up, and then voting stopped, and people, I think, produced ballots, or they did. We'll find out the modus operandi, but it just destroyed the voters' confidence in the whole voting process. It's a third world country today. It really is, because you can't. Your vote doesn't mean anything. And this is from the left. It always talks about voter suppression and one man, one vote. And it's I've never seen anything like it.
And you know, Victor, by the time I'm off the airwaves here in about an hour and 20 minutes, they're going to have Biden leading in Georgia, Biden leading in Pennsylvania. One or more of these news groups are going to call it for Joe Biden. We have Al Gore, who litigated almost 40 days. How can they call an election when we have active litigation that's challenging, and like in Pennsylvania, the fundamental constitutional changes they made, that is the court made, not the legislature made, and some of these enormous numbers, absurd numbers, almost 90% of the vote came out in Wisconsin. Nobody believes that. How can they call an election for a president? They're trying to end this as fast as they can, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, they have to have the Secretary of State of each one of these states certify the election, and that's what they're working on. Every time Donald Trump, we were told, was going to survive in Georgia, that the absentee or whatever we want to call these ballots of various origins didn't quite get the percentage, they'd say, "Oh my God, there's more ballots than we thought." And the same is true in Arizona. They said, well, if we just get 58%, and that ballot pool keeps enlarging. And I've never heard, if you know of election where estimates at 89 to 90% of the registered voters of Wisconsin turned out, I can't believe that figure that's reported.
I think Saddam Hussein, was the last one to get that.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. And it's scary because we're so self-righteous and lecturing the world about Baghdad Bobs and all of these crazy propagandists and irregular voting in Central America. And here we are doing the exact same thing. The only difference is they were honest, they were crooked, and we have this sanctimonious, we're doing it for the people, and we're virtuous. It's really scary. I keep saying that, but...
well, before we run out of time, I want to raise another issue with you.
Yes.
Mail-in voting. It's obvious that the Democrats win big with mail-in voting, that the mail-in voting in these battleground states come in late, that Nancy Pelosi held up some of these relief bills until she could nationalize and compel every state to have mail-in voting and do it the way she wanted to do. They are trying to, if you don't mind, Californianize the United States with one-party rule, and I think that's what people don't understand. This is one election, and what they've done is terrible, but this is going to go on and on and on until it's stopped, isn't it?
It is, but, the Supreme Court did step in during the Jim Crow period about things like poll taxes, and they did decide that an 18-year-old, from 21 to 18-year-old, required an amendment. And so I do think that the Republicans really have to work on that they're going to have to say, you know what, any ballot that comes in after an election, that's postmarked after election is ineligible, and they're going to have to set a time of maybe 4 days before the election. You can't just vote every single day and then have ballots that show up after the polls close. They're going to have to deal that with on a national level, because these blue states are basically sanctuary cities, not in the terms of just immigration, but they're sanctuary cities that are nullifying federal law. All of them are. And federal protocols and American traditions about voting, and they make a difference.
Well, it's interesting because they don't want protections. The Democrats push for earlier and earlier voting and later voting. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
They don't want that. If they ask you to file your tax returns, they say, okay, as long as it's dated by April 15th. Now, what if the postmark can't be read? You think the IRS is going to say, well, we'll read it in your favor? You think the IRS is going to say if the signature doesn't match, we'll accept your tax return? How about we at least apply the same rules in elections that we apply to filing our tax returns?
Yes. And you know why they're doing it? Because they know that if they did it state by state in shotgun fashion, they'd get caught. So what they do is they calibrate and modulate the ongoing vote tally, because they shut down the county and they think, well, this doesn't look good in Wisconsin. And notice, remember in 2016, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, they were not prepped for that. They thought they were so they were going to have such a great landslide that Donald Trump was going to fail. So they weren't prepped. And Donald Trump actually increased his lead all during the night in those key states. And everybody was assuming he'd do it again. But this time they were prepped and they knew exactly which state to modulate and massage, and they looked at the pulse of the returns coming in, and they reacted accordingly. And they didn't do it everywhere.
And isn't it amazing, Victor? That election was over at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning. It was over. We didn't have all these issues. It just shows you in 4 years' time that they not only tried to take Trump out as president of the United States, they were working these states. They were looking ahead, and they said, if we can't remove him now, we're going to make sure he never comes back.
Oh, I know it. And I went to bed thinking, I looked at these huge leads in Michigan, and I looked at the huge ones in Wisconsin. I looked at the number of voters who had already voted. I looked at the registered voters, and it was already, I thought, well, 71% of the vote. There can't be any more votes. You can't mathematically, and then you wake up, and it's a whole new world. And the same thing with Michael Bloomberg and spending almost $500 million to destroy Republican Senate campaign. It was almost like a Costa Nostra. They were sending a message: if you buck us in a public way like Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham, we're going to go after you, and we may not win, but we're going to make life so miserable for you, and we're going to deter anybody else from taking a high-profile stance if you're a Republican senator. And I think it was aimed at trying to deter people. Nobody's ever heard of $100 million spent in which was obviously going to be a losing effort, but it was just I don't know what you would call it. It was just a mean, downright deterrent effort to send a message. This is what happens to you when you're a high-profile conservative. We've got the money now, and we're going to destroy you. And that was scary as well.
All right, Victor. I want to thank you. Please stay out there. Keep writing. Keep speaking. Maybe you'll find a better format, just saying. And good luck to you.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, take care. He needs to get off that National Review and write somewhere else, in my humble opinion.